So I only had a couple days to prepare, but there was this one thing that was really on my mind. And what I want to talk to you today is wait on the Lord. He keeps his promises. I was asking a question. Now, if y'all said, what is a promise? Well, a promise is a declaration or assurance that one will do a particular thing or that a particular thing will happen. Now, has anyone ever, made a promise before? I think pretty much all of us have, right? Maybe you promise your wife to take out the trash, right? How many of us have broken a promise? It is our human nature sometimes to fall short on fulfilling promises. And sometimes maybe we promise that we can do something like, I can promise I can go into work this day, but something terrible happens, like an emergency, a family emergency, and you're like, okay, I really can't though. Like, something happens. Sometimes it is a legitimate reason why you can't fulfill those promises. But that's our human nature. That's the human side of things. Our God never, ever breaks his promises. Ever. One of the most well-known promises of God is the one he gave to Abraham, the covenant. Now, God promised Abraham great land, descendants as numerous as the stars, and a son through his wife. Abraham and Sarah, now, while Abraham was very faithful to the Lord, they had some problems of their own. I think one of the problems is patience. What is patience? Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. He already talked about it earlier. Are any of us patient people here? But no, we live in a society where we want things now. We want everything on demand. We want our food, like fast food. We want it now if it takes 2 minutes for complaining. That kind of thing. So we, as a human society, can be very impatient. And even back then, some of the great men of God had patience issues too. Having patience is very important with God's promises. If God promised you something, it means that 100% of the time, it will happen. Remember, he's the Alpha, he's the Omega, he's the beginning and the end. So we say that all the time. We've seen him fulfill his promises many times before in our lives. But we still get impatient. We still ask God, where is it? You've said it'll happen. I've been waiting a week. Where is it at? Where's my deliverance, Jesus? We have to wait on him. Find a God. God is outside of time. So he already knows exactly what's going to happen in your situation. All you have to do is wait on him. But Abraham and Sarah, began to lose patience and came up with the conclusion that maybe God meant this instead. Maybe God didn't mean directly through Sarah, but her handmaiden, technically, it's your seed, Abraham, right? You're going to have a son through my servant. Just, go ahead, do that. But God specifically said, through your wife, Sarah, you will have a son. So, we are very good at convincing ourselves not to follow God's plan. We like to interfere a lot of the time, do our things our way because we get impatient, right? But even when we interfere, his promise is still there. His plan will never change. Nothing is too hard for God. We have a hard time wrapping our mind around that. We try to fit God into a little box we call the way of humanity. There are limits to what we can do. And we know that. So we try to apply that to God's plan, God's power. But God's power is limitless. There is no limit to his power. We can try to confine his power to something that we can understand. God's power is so great that whatever we have, all we have to do is offer it up to him. Sarah shouldn't have given children suck, for I have borne him a son in his old age. God kept his promise. Think about this. Whenever God called Abraham for the first time, he was a lot younger. He was like, right, okay, what's happening? I'm getting really old, and so is Sarah. She won't be able to conceive a child at this point, God. What's going on? And that's decades, y'all. That's decades, and we can't even handle a couple of minutes. And through him, through Isaac, not Ishmael, through Isaac was God's plan. Abraham's descendants was through him, because God promised him that. God keeps his promises. So if God promises you deliverance, if God promises you love, comfort, all those things, you better believe it, because he keeps his promises no matter what. Now Joseph was also given a promise by God through dreams. The same. Genesis 37. Sometimes people will doubt the promises of God. Our humanity says it can't be done. Little old Joseph. How? I'm your father. How am I going to bow down to you? Joseph's brothers hated him for what he said. So they thought they had to get rid of him. You know, we know the story. They sold him off to slavery to Egypt. And he was in Potiphar's house, and he quickly went from slave to the leader of the whole house. Even in the roughest situations in your life, something good will come out of it. Joseph was about 17 when he was told the promises through his dreams to his brothers. 17 years old. When he went before Pharaoh, he was 30 years old. He had to wait all those years to finally fulfill God's promise. That's why waiting on the Lord is important. The Lord orders our steps. You know, we can think that sometimes we mess up too much to even be one of God's own. But like we say, he's the Alpha, he's the Omega. He knows exactly what's going to happen in your lifetime. He's faithful towards us because he knows what our life is going to be. He knows the amazing things each and every single one of us in this place right now are capable of, because he's seen it. He's just leading you to get to that point. There's a lot of obstacles the enemy's going to place during that road. But God is always going to be there with you. Through him, we have the victory. It's already predestined. It may look big and scary right now. May look completely dark. But God's promise to you is that I will get you through this. I had to go through so much things. You know, God was with David his whole life. He fought bears, he fought lions, he fought all those things just to protect sheep. He was a warrior. He defeated Goliath. And because of that, Saul made him commander of his army. And the people of Israel started to praise David. And jealousy started to well up in Saul because he knew God was with him, no longer with him. We have to get out of the way. We have to get out of the way and let God work. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. David had patience. He waited on the Lord. He let God take control even after everything he went through, because God keeps his promises forever. The same God that parted the Red Sea is the same God we worship and praise today. The same God that healed the blind man is the same God we worship today. The same God that raised Lazarus from the dead is the same God we worship and praise today. But we think we can't give our problems to him. Well, I have news for you. No problem is too big for God. He promised